Hi, Tevis. Thanks for joining me this morning. Really excited to talk to you about you and your career and your consulting practice. So, without further ado, can you kind of give us a little bit of background about you and how you got to where you are today?
Gosh, I was thinking about this in prep, and it's like, where does the story really begin for any of us? Does it begin when we first pick a college major? Does it begin when we first fall in love with hearing our friends' challenges and trying to help them through it? Does it start with excitement for what it takes to succeed in athletics? Like, for all of us who move into the coaching space, the genesis story, I feel like, is probably a lot more fraught, or not fraught, but a lot more, historied, than a lot of other professions. For me, it began when people would always say to me, "Oh, you're so understanding," and, "Oh, you're really good at giving advice," and I would kind of cringe, because last thing I wanted to do is be a know-it-all. I have carried that throughout my entire career as a coach. In fact, when I first got pulled into coaching, I really shrugged away from even using that word because the C word had been used so much. So I'll tell you the progression of how it kind of happened. I was curious about why people hate their jobs. Like, why? Why? You and I have both served in the armed forces, right? We've seen and we've explored what a really challenging job is. Like, I've also done a lot of service work. I've um, some drainage pools in Latin America for impoverished communities. Like there are really hard things. So how come we put on our clothes and we either get on a screen or we go to an office and the drama immediately sets in? And I had gotten an MBA and I had already served in the army and I had already worked in a lot of these other capacities. And it suddenly struck me. I was like, no one is laying in a ditch dying. There are no bullets flying overhead. Why do we struggle so much to enjoy ourselves in the midst of being productive together? And it was a really kind of a framework question that took me into the questions of identity, the questions of fear, of power, of resolving problems. Like, all these things kind of came into a focus. And at the time, I was only 33. And I thought, well, I don't know how to do all that, but I do know that if people could breathe and de stress a little, it would certainly help them. So I started out in well being. And I was taking well being practices, and Yahoo, Google, like AOL, all the usual suspects were the first movers in that. And through that experience, I literally got dragged into coaching. People kept asking me, "Can you work with this executive? Can you work with that executive? Could you create a high performer immersion that keeps people from burning out? Will you help me to retain my highest performers because I need to groom them for the C suite?" So through all these nudges to move into that, I it's I pursued a coaching training and took a ton of trainings after that. But so that's kind of the origin story. The company continued, though, to offer services on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, very interesting answer though. And you're absolutely correct with it. Corporate America is not, it does not have the same, risk or danger that being in the military does, yet so many people do not find fulfillment in what they're doing. So that's really interesting that that's the angle that you take. How did that progress? You started off coaching, like how did it progress to where you are now?
Yeah. Um, well, so we had started with a really simple premise that the C suite would have access to resources commensurate with their level of privilege. And my curiosity was really around scalable solutions. Like, how do we help folks who don't have a nanny, who maybe both partners work in the households, and there's things are more stretched. So my premise was, how do we integrate the tools and practices that help people to sustain themselves at their best during the workday while the workday is really a 24/7ization kind of question, how do we do that? And so that really grew us into a team of hundreds of contractors, which called for a lot of systems and a lot of management. The question then became, as the company continued to function on that end, and I was personally being dragged into more the C-suite conversations, how to support people really to fire on all cylinders, sustain it over time with a lot of curveballs. The question became, what kind of business do I really want to have?
Mhm. What what was the answer to that question? What business do you really want to have, or what business do you currently have?
So I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, and especially in the coaching space, we have so many choices, right? We can pitch for the consulting and the strategy work, right? We can do the scalable kind of employee like activation and empowerment work, right? We can do the retreat work where we take people on offsites and help them to reset and regauge how they're going to move forward, right? There are so many ways for us to operate. And you can be a jack of all trades. And for quite a while, I played at that. And part of what I realized, there was a moment when I had grown my employee team to 13, and we had about 300 contractors around the world. And there was a moment that I had to look in the mirror and really ask myself what I was doing, because I had joined some kind of CEO masterminds. I'm sure a lot of folks on your podcast have done that, and the audience have done that, right? Because we like to get the support of a community, of a container to mirror back to us what we're doing right and doing wrong. And some of the stuff I heard in the mastermind I was in, and I'm not going to name any names because it's very well known, was really old school OG command and control, make them afraid of you kind of stuff. And I realized on some level that that had been ingrained in my thinking all along. But by having it mirrored back to me as something I didn't want to lead from, it's something I wasn't teaching my own clients. I was like, "Oh, crap. I drank the Kool-Aid early on, and I've been spewing this stuff in some shape or form on my own people." And when I started to shift that and retool that and really understand how unconscious some of these assumptions about power and influence are within us, that's when I finally had enough time and space and shifting those behaviors to actually become a good boss. And once I nailed being a good boss, I was kind of ready to scale back down and do the work I really loved.
That's super interesting, and I love how you said that because there's like that old school mentality of power and you got to do what I say, etc. But that doesn't, at least in this day and age, tend to really motivate people to do their best work. Do you find that there are a couple, maybe one or two tactics that you use now that really motivate people to do what they're best at?
I think the biggest thing is listening. If you can listen to what someone is sitting with and struggling with, and you can give them a sense of being seen and heard, they will tell you exactly what they need to be motivated. They will tell you. And whether they tell you consciously or unconsciously, if you listen long enough, you're going to see the the breadcrumb trail into their psyche and be able to say, okay, really understand what matters to you. Because if you can align between what matters to that person and what matters to the objective or to the company, then you can make some magic happen. I've always said it's not about employee engagement, it's about alignment.
Yeah, I like that. That's employee engagement. Take them to an event or whatever the case may be. That might not land home if you're not listening, for example, to what they actually say they need. So I think that's a great point. So it sounds like, Tevis, you scaled up your business and then you perhaps scaled it down and focused in more. Can we kind of talk about that? Like, are there any tools or systems that you're using now that you're more focused that are enabling you and your team to do more than, maybe even that you could have with a huge, 300 person plus network.
Yeah, well, we're talking about over 25 years of being in business. It's scary to think about it, honestly. Even so, things have changed a lot just from the CRMs, right? We've used HubSpot. From the culture perspective, we've played with Culture Amp. Like there's a number of things that we've played with, having gotten so small, right? Because right now it's like me and a team of three, and that's perfect. I feel like I really had flexed into the ego of can I build a big thing, and then it at some point pulled back. At this point, I'm using AI to do a lot of things I would have needed a second set of eyes for, right? I would have needed first draft or a third draft, right? Like I normally create the first draft, I feed it into AI, and then I have it come back and make suggestions for me. But the main tools I'm leaning on in that sense are probably the same most of us are in. And that is, how do I use this infinitely expanding mind that is at my fingertips to help me move quickly and accurately and continue to expand the creative ways I can answer the challenges my clients are facing? So, both in terms of how I operate the business, but also the solutions that we're coming up for clients.
Love it. So HubSpot, big fan of HubSpot. And when you say AI, are you referring to ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, one of those large language models? Yeah, it's a perfect use case. Use it to free up your time for the higher leverage work and get you, 80% of the way there. It sounds like that's how you're using it. Obviously AI is a huge emerging trend that's happening in our society. Do you see any other trends that are happening like in your business, or is it like very AI focused even when you're coaching your clients?
So I've been following the work of Dr. Tavis, and yes, her name sounds a lot like mine. At NYU, she runs one of the HR PhD programs, and she's been pushing for quite a while AI as a coaching solution and all the ways to be able to use it. And I've watched this. I think this really brings up an important question that I'm especially curious about, and that is going back to my own unconscious behavior, my unconscious kind of inhumane behavior, like that urge to separate myself from the people I depended on for me to be successful. This is very normal. It is very embedded in our assumptions about power, right? As we move into an age of AI in which we're turning to AI not just for companion, right? I actually gotten my first ad for companion AI this morning, and I was shocked and horrified because they had my gender wrong, and let's just say that what I saw was like, I was like, "Oh my god." Um, but, um but if we agree that human beings were already challenged to tap into their humanity as a source of leadership and impact and connection and inspiration, even before AI existed, right? If we agree that the mental health crisis we are watching is one of isolation and detachment and overwhelm, and if we agree, and I'm not assuming that we agree on all these things, if we agree that the more time that we spend on a screen that tells us great job, that feeds us all the positive yummy, right? The endorphin flooding prompts that our system has been craving its entire life. If we agree that these factors are present, and then we look at shifting to AI for coaching, I wanna be really mindful about how we make sure that we are having enough human contact for the rub, for the discomfort, for having to work through human misunderstanding, for having to talk to each other, for being in the same space and breathing the same air with each other, right? Because these are things that our human animal needs ultimately to attenuate, right? To self-manage. That's one of the things I'm really curious about is in this age of incredible advancement in the leverage of what I would call aggregated intelligence, right? But there's been a whole conversation around the word artificial intelligence. It's actually not accurate, right? It's more like an aggregated intelligence. And as that happens, I think it's going to be really curious and really important to say, okay, coaching world, okay, leadership world, you were already fighting to get people's attention before crisis hit. And a lot of times when crisis hit, people would come to you and say, what can you do? What can you do to help us solve this huge walkout or this huge upheaval in the board or whatever the crisis was, right? But okay, coaching world, how do you keep the connective tissue active in the midst of the ease and the frictionlessness of I can just turn to AI and do it?
That's so interesting. And it begs, a ton of different questions because people do end up relying on AI too much and you can end up seeing it in their work. And then, you mentioned the companion AI and people use AI as like a therapist and where does that take us down the road a couple years from now in a crisis where people are spending too much time on their phones or kids are spending too much time on their phones? Do you have an assumption or a theory on like what is the right amount of human connection versus reliance on technology?
God, spoken like a true post-millennial thinker. Because we all want some neat formula, right? We want an algorithm. We want give it to me if A plus B equals things aren't working, then what does C plus D equal? Like we all want, like, look, we want Ozempic, right? We want an SSRI, like we want everything. We want our gurus to be infallible. So many people in our country want an absolute voice of authority running the government. Like there are so many ways in which are urged away from complexity of actually just paying attention is so seductive. It is so powerful. But it is not one that we can cave to, not if we want to lead. If we want to lead, we got to walk into that complexity, open our eyes, and pay attention with all of our senses, right? So the thing I look for is what's not working. When is it not working? How is it not working? How does it express? And then you're going to figure out, oh, this team needs this kind of human contact. This other team, they're tight. They're good, right? I think an organism by organism thing, if we can think of it that way, right? Because we say team, but what team really is it's intended to be a functioning organism. If the organism starts to wither and die, then you know that you need an intervention of some kind. And then you have to go in and pay attention and do the work.
Fascinating. I could ask you leadership questions all day, and I know a lot of that kind of stems from the military experience we both have. One final question: are there any traits other than being a good listener that maybe help leaders become a better listener, or what traits do you look out for, or keep in mind for yourself when you're leading your team? Is there anything that pops out?
I'm going to share with you about my experience in coaching people. I can have the most effective, impactful, skilled, knowledgeable coaching client C-suite, right? And if they aren't willing to express fear, express curiosity, express anxiety, like if they are not able in the face of someone who is offering them complete emotional safety, right? If they cannot, in their moments of safety, confess to the moments of darkness, chances are other people around them are not going to feel safe to do the same thing. So, whatever relationship you as a leader have with yourself is going to show you the limits of what people are willing to open up to you within themselves. Right. So vulnerability and authenticity. And I'm not saying, oh, I cry every night over Hallmark movies. Like I'm not saying that kind of pablum. What I'm saying is that imperviousness to human, not failings, but human complexity is oftentimes the biggest limiting factor to working within your own team and working across teams.
That's a great way to put it. Vulnerability is obviously key, but authenticity as well. You're right. You don't have to be crying every night about Hallmark movies to be able to display that. Tevis, how do you measure success when you're working with your clients? How does that work? I know there's probably not a formula or something like that, but is there something that you can see or something you can tell, or how do you measure success?
Your success and the connection and the energy I feel. So it can you see that? Yes. Sometimes you can see that, right? Can you hear it? Yes. Sometimes you can hear it in the tone of voice, right? And the level of energy that they're bringing. So there are certain kind of sensates expression of it, but kind of like a podcast, right? Like you've been hosting a lot of people. You know when you're clicking. How do you know? So I'm gonna turn it back on you, Mr. Podcast Host. How do you know when it's working?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You can tell. I guess you can sense it by the reciprocation of, for lack of a better term, like the energy that's getting put back into the conversation, or the relationship. So you can tell when people are engaged. Um, you can tell when people are willing to put more in and work harder, etc. So I guess that I kind of answered my own question in a sense. Then
I know I'm horrible about that. I want to tell you about something really cool I'm working on now.
tell me.
That kind of ties all this in together. So a couple of years ago, I heard about a group called the House of Beautiful Business. And I was intrigued. For one thing, I was like, who's ballsy enough to name a consulting group something so absurd, right? Like we're not talking conscious capitalism, right? Or whatever. B Corp, right? We're talking the House of Beautiful Business. And I was like, well, I gotta know who these people are. And a friend of mine sent their stuff to me and said, you need to be speaking on their stage. And right then the pandemic completely shut down. And after the pandemic, I finally started. So I started to go to their stuff, and it was like World Economic Forum meets Burning Man. Like, it was like the smartest people you have heard talking about tech, environment, economy, commerce, leadership, creativity, mixed with the coolest artistic expressions. And we have teamed up to create a business school. And we're
Very.
calling it we're calling it the Beautiful Business School, and we're offering a certificate in beautiful leadership, how to lead beautifully. And the questions you're asking are really key to it. Because in an age of AI, right, in this most humanly expansive age in which technology is so available, how do we continue to lead with expansiveness, being able to ground break and not just do what's expected of us, right? How do we continue to expand our creativity and connection? And we're saying it very, very, very simply. It's created by humans, aided by AI, and co-created by the students, right? So the students are really going to be called forward to create throughout the program. And yeah, so AI is going to be a part of it, and all the forms of intelligence, all the forms of creativity. And I'm super stoked about it because this is the kind of thing that the challenge of right now has opened up the possibility for. Without this polycrisis that we are facing right now, um, I don't think people would have felt the urgency towards asking questions this and answering them this creatively. And so I'm super excited about it. It's going to start in February. And if you want to learn more, it's beautifulbusiness.school.
So interesting. Sounds very impactful. I can't wait to see more about it when it comes out. And, of course, keep me in the loop. I'd love to hear more about that. That sounds amazing.
You better hurry because like we just announced 2 weeks ago, and we've already like I don't want to tell you numbers, but it's getting big.
It's getting good quick. I love it.
It is getting big.
Do you have One question I would have about that, or, as you're getting ready to launch, I'm sure there's a ton of different, things that you're juggling, or balls in the air and stuff like that. Is there one obstacle that you have that, whether with this venture or your own business, that if you could wave a magic wand and remove it, like what would that be?
Biggest obstacle is connection, right? How do we really connect to the people who we can work with well together, be it as collaborators, me as their client, them as my client, right? Being able to connect, because most of us are not gathering as frequently and with as much casualness as we used to. Like, we'll go to a conference, but we don't just hang out in areas where we're going to meet people that are of professional relevance from that standpoint. So not to sound sanguine and romantic about the old days pre-pandemic, but I do want to sound romantic about it. I think the biggest challenge is human exposure, because if your LinkedIn is anything like mine, I'm amazed by how all of a sudden everyone in my LinkedIn knows how to craft an 8 paragraph perfectly phrase something about a complex topic. Like it's like, okay, where's the human in that, right? Like how do I connect with you about that? So really, my biggest challenge is human connection.
That's a great challenge. I feel like that's going to be a lot of people's biggest challenge here going forward. In that, do you have any advice for people just starting out on their, individual career path, like coaches or consultants? Do you have any advice for those folks?
If you see the Buddha on the side of the road, kill him, is the old saying, right? That you're gonna fall in love and you're gonna find holy cows all along the way, and you're gonna say, "Ah, this is it. This is it." And you're gonna learn this methodology, or you're gonna hear from this teacher, you're gonna do this and do that, and just realize that no one person, no one tool, no one map is ever going to be the answer, right? These are all just little pieces of a mosaic that you will continue to aggregate and build for yourself. And that will be your magic, is what have you fallen in love with? And what have you been strong enough within your own resolve to continue moving and carry forward?
Incredible advice. Tevis, if somebody wants to find you or look you up, how can they do that? What's the best way?
They can find me 3 ways. My website is balanceintegration.com. They can find me on LinkedIn, and they can find me on Instagram. And my Insta is a lot of inspirational stuff. You'll find out I play some rock and roll on the weekends with friends. Right? See a lot of shots of hikes and stuff like that. I call them my mental health moment posts. So if you'd like that, come hang out with me any of those places.
Awesome. Tevis, thanks so much for taking some time to talk to me today, and I really appreciate your conversation. Best of luck with the launch in February. I'll absolutely be keeping an eye out for it.
Thank you so much, Eamon.